Continuing with Congress, there are some procedural characteristics of the House and the Senate that we need to talk about. There are important differences between the two, and there are certain ways in which they operate, which make them unique and separate them from one another. So the House of Representatives is led by the Speaker of the House. This is selected by the membership of the House of Representatives. It's a member of the majority party. Speaker of the House has an enormous amount of power and influence in the House of Representatives, and they can he or she can dictate what the House's agenda will be. They can play a large role in who's on what committee, and so they're certainly a very, very important spokesperson for the House of Representatives, and they play a role in communicating with their counterparts in the Senate and also with the president. The Rules Committee is something that exists in the House of Representatives and does not exist in the Senate. In the House of Representatives, the entire chamber is governed much more by specific rules and guidelines. The Senate has fewer of them, and individual senators have more power. So the Rules Committee is a very important committee because it establishes how bills will be debated, how much time a bill will have for debate, how much people can say about bills, whether amendments can be added to bills. The House of Representatives, therefore, is more likely to get legislation passed because they're able to restrict what the individual members of the House can do. The Senate, individual senators can slow down the process quite a bit. A discharge petition is a petition where a majority of members of the House of Representatives will actually sign a petition and take a vote to bring a bill out of committee to the floor of the House of Representatives for a vote. And so really a discharge petition will happen to override if the speaker doesn't want to vote on a bill or maybe a committee is not, a bill has been introduced to a committee, but they're deciding not to send it to the full floor for a vote. And the entire House can kind of override the leadership and send that out to the floor. Now, this is kind of an unusual thing to occur. And it means that the leadership doesn't have a whole lot of power. And a committee of the whole is simply when the entire House acts as a committee for parliamentary purposes. So certain big events, things like the State of the Union, the whole House will kind of act and vote on issues together for procedural purposes. But these are just kind of technical aspects of how the House functions. Another thing with regards to the House that's important is that they have a Ways and Means Committee. And the Senate doesn't have a Ways and Means Committee. The Ways and Means Committee is where revenue bills originate in the House. So it's important to know that the Ways and Means Committee is where revenue bills originate, and that happens in the House, not in the Senate. On the Senate side, the Senate is something that is very much, again, controlled by individual senators more, and they are technically, underneath the vice president. The vice president is the president of the Senate. They don't have real formal power other than casting a tie-breaking vote, but they are the technical president of the Senate. In the Senate, you also have what are called filibusters. So a filibuster is now a procedural move whereby senators will delay action on a bill by endlessly debating it. And in the modern era, they don't actually go through the process of endlessly debating, although there are examples of senators who have kind of grandstanded and they've kind of gone out there and spoke for 24 hours. But a senator can speak for as long as he or she wants to, as long as they don't yield the floor to someone else in the Senate except for a question. If someone wants to ask them a question, then they can stop speaking and then get the floor back. So if enough senators get together and take turns questioning one another, they can debate forever and prevent a bill from actually being voted on. Except cloture can be invoked, and this means that 60 senators can vote to end debate, and that will basically start the countdown clock on ending debate in the Senate on a bill. Now, this is all because of the Senate rules. This is not something that is in the Constitution. This is how the Senate has evolved to function here in 2020. And the filibuster is something that is used regularly now. And it's now a kind of a procedural move. Someone, the minority party can just say, we intend to filibuster, and then that basically stops the bill in its tracks unless there is 60 votes to go through the cloture procedure and continue the ball rolling. So the Senate really requires a supermajority to pass any legislation, a 60-vote majority, which some people think is not the way things should be. And some politicians think the Senate should get rid of it. The Senate can change their rules by a majority vote. The Senate can say, we no longer are going to allow filibusters. But the majority party doesn't change those rules. They don't, even though they get frustrated by the filibuster, they don't change the rules because they want to have the power to filibuster whenever they end up in the minority. And that's typically how things go. In the Senate, you have something called unanimous consent agreements, which is simply this procedural moves where the Senate can move things along without actually taking votes, so it can speed things up. And then, that'll be a good place to stop because that talks about kind of some structural differences between the House and the Senate, and then we'll move into a few policy areas to discuss as we wrap up these flashcards.